On behalf of USBBY, we warmly welcome you to our co-sponsored session, Read Around the World, Innovative International Publishing in the U.S. We thank our USBBY board members, Ellen Myrick, President, Publisher Spotlight, and Caroline Ward, one of our 2 ALA representatives on the USBBY board, for organizing this wonderful program. We give special thanks to our publisher participants who span time zones from the United Kingdom to New Zealand. We are grateful to Christina Moorhead at the USBBY Secretariat for creating this video. For those of you who are not familiar with USBBY, we are one of 80 national sections of IBY, the International Board on Books for Young People, founded by Jelle Leppmann in 1953, with headquarters in Basel, Switzerland. The mission of IBY is for children's books to serve as a bridge to peace and understanding throughout the world. USBBY will be hosting the 14th IBY Regional Conference, March 4 through 6, 2022, in Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt University. We invite you to learn more about the conference and USBBY at usbby.org. We would welcome your membership and active participation in our many projects and activities. And now I am very pleased to introduce Caroline Ward, who will introduce our program. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Evie, for that welcome. I'm Caroline Ward, the ALA representative to the USBBY board. And it's my honor to be moderating this panel that brings together 4 international publishers for a conversation about their publishing philosophies, as well as the challenges and benefits of publishing their books in the US. But first, let me introduce these esteemed panel members. From Nigeria is Bibi Bakari Usef. Bibi is co-founder and publishing director of Kasav Republic Press. She has worked as a research and gender consultant as well as in academia. She sits on the editorial board of a number of influential journals. She is a Yale World Fellow, a Desmond Tutu Fellow, and a Frankfurt Book Fair Fellow. She is chair of the Initiative for Equal Rights, the largest organization in West Africa devoted to LGBT advocacy. Cassava Republic Press was founded in Abuja, Nigeria in 2006, with the aim of bringing high-quality fiction and nonfiction for adults and children to a global audience. Welcome, Bibi.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
And Dr. Alice Curry from Oxford, England. Alice is the founder and CEO of Latana, an award-winning children's publishing house and social enterprise with a mission to see all children reflected in the books they read. A former lecturer, Alice holds a PhD in children's literature, has published regularly in international journals, and is a frequent keynote speaker at conferences across Europe. Passionate about entrepreneurship in publishing, Alice is committed to widening access to inclusive children's books by authors from unrepresented groups and to minimize Lantana's carbon footprint. Alice was the 2017 winner of the Kim Scott Walwyn Prize for Women in Publishing. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you, thank you.
Delaram Ganimafard is the co-founder with her husband Kareem of Tiny Owl Publishing. She was born in Iran and moved to the UK in 2010 with her husband and their 2 sons. She was going to work on a PhD in sociology. However, seeing that there were very few books her sons could relate to, she ended up starting a publishing company. It was this need for diverse books that inspired her. She wanted her children to be connected culturally with their school friends. Tiny Owl's first books came out in 2015 and were translations from the Persian. As they grew, they embraced an increasingly more global approach, and they now publish inspiring books that celebrate diverse, inclusive stories for all children. And welcome, Dalaram.
Thank you.
And finally, Julia Marshall. Julia is the founder and publisher of Gecko Press, international publishers of curiously good children's books from around the world since 2004. Gecko's books are sold in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, and the USA. Julia is also a translator, and she has translated children's books from Swedish into English. Gecko Press was awarded the New Zealand Publishers of the Year Award in 2017 and the Margaret Mahy Award in 2021 for lifetime contribution to children's publishing in New Zealand. She's currently president of the Publishers Association of New Zealand. What a group. So let's get started. I'm going to direct my first question to Bibi. I was so impressed by the passion and commitment, well, actually behind all of your publishing missions. But Bibi, you have a very interesting video on your website where you share your vision of publishing books for children. And when someone asked you, why are you going to the expense to publish these books for children in color? Isn't black and white good enough? You had a very interesting response, and I'm wondering if you would share it with us.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, I mean, the question is right within the Nigerian context where to produce color books is very expensive and most parents they can't afford it. But I firmly believe that there's a world of black and white waiting for children to discover, unfortunately. And so why not introduce them at an early age to the diverse, wonderful colors of the world at an earlier age so that they start from the premise that the world is more than just them and the world is full of colors and colors that are both beautiful, that they can enter into all of these different colors from where they're at, rather than a world that fixes them into a black and white world. And I think it's really important that we introduce children at a very early age so they can see that they can think in technicolors rather than be locked into one one-dimensional way of thinking. So that's the reason why I think that it's important on the African continent that we produce picture books, full color picture books for children, even if it might be expensive.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have responses to that. I see you nodding, Dalaram.
Yeah, this is very interesting because I think that, well, it's a symbol of how children's books are published around the world in black and white, monochrome, one voice. And we want to read different narratives, not only one, and see all the colors. And that's very true. Not only in the sense that is really a picture book with colors, and that is very important, but also the way that these stories are told from different points of views and all these different voices that we have to hear and let our children to expand their horizons.
Right. It's really commendable that you are putting your resources, that this is important for you in your publishing. Let me follow up with another kind of philosophy question. Julia, I love the description of the type of books that you publish, and I quote from your website. Some of our books don't behave, even when they know how to. We choose books that slow you down or speed you up, books that tell us things in beautiful ways. Julia, I would love to know how you select these books that don't behave.
Thank you, Caroline. I think that the idea that books that don't behave even when they know how to, for me, is that some of the, and I think it feeds into your ideas of black and white and bringing more than one point of view. I think we're looking for the stories where the characters are perhaps flawed, and people or animals or characters as they are, not I think in many children's books sometimes we present the world as we would like it to be, and so I particularly, I think, I'm drawn to the books that are just a little I don't know, that don't behave always. We have published a book called Cacaboudon in French, and we published it as Poobum, which for me is an example of a I guess a rabbit who knows he shouldn't use that word, but really enjoys saying it until the final sort of run, when he says, "Mother, you know this, the flavor of this soup is exquisite." And so we sort of hope that the children are going to remember that word, as you know, I don't know. That's he doesn't behave.
Anyone else that publishes books where the children don't behave, or the books don't behave?
I mean, I think to an extent, sort of all of us here are publishing books that don't behave in that they are not, they're sort of defying the prevailing norms. I mean, we're working specifically to find unique voices. We're working with underrepresented groups. We're trying to showcase storytelling traditions or ideas that aren't necessarily seen on bookshelves at the moment. So in lots of ways, in that sense, I don't think our books behave, but that's a good thing, right? We're trying to sort of forge new ground, as it were.
Well, someone once said that all children's books have to be slightly subversive in order to be really effective. And I think that's probably true. A question about diversity and inclusion. You've already alluded to this. In the United States, movements such as We Need Diverse Books and Our Own Voices are slowly changing the look of American publishing for children. But I was really struck, as international publishers, each of you seem to have already really strongly embraced a philosophy of diversity and inclusion. Alice, on the Lantana website, you state up front that you intend to change the game by publishing inclusive books that celebrate our differences. And BB, you not only want to develop African writing, you want us to change you want to change the way we all think about African writing. Either Alice or BB or any of our panelists, would you like to speak to your philosophy about diversity and inclusion?
I mean, if you don't mind me going first, or just, a couple of words on that, just in that it has underpinned everything we've done right from the start. I think it makes no sense to be not to publish books that are representative of our readers. I mean, I had understood sort of from an academic perspective why that was important for a long time, but then I guess the personal trigger for me was my little mixed race nephews, nephew at the time, and now nephews plus niece being born, and it was that idea that they were going to grow up not seeing themselves in books, and obviously all of us in our various ways are having those experiences, and it's I don't know, it's well, not only sort of the an important thing to do, I think it's the right thing for us to do, and sort of every publisher has a responsibility to an extent. And I think we were behind you in the States in terms of documenting and surveying the landscape of children's books. We had to rely on your statistics from the CCBC for a long time, which were relevant to our sort of publishing landscape, but weren't quite accurate to it. And until a couple of years ago, when CLPE, the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education in the UK, started putting together their own statistics on the on diversity and inclusion in children's publishing, and found the shocking statistic at the time that only 1% of all children's books, this was in 2017, featured a protagonist of colour. But I had set up the company sort of several years before that, because I think it was just obvious looking at our bookshelves that what the state of play was. So I think all of us here, it was sort of really changing the game at that point, because we were looking at a landscape which just wasn't reflecting what we saw in our readers. Yeah.
When I think about inclusivity and diversity, I always think in terms of the importance of children being able to look at the mirror as well as look outside of the window. And I think for many, so you have a situation where white children tend to look at the mirror all the time. They see themselves overly represented in every single thing they consume, which is a good thing. But at the same time, in order to build empathy in a child, you also need to look at the outside of the window so that you can see what the world looks like. So there's always a relationship between looking at yourself in the mirror and looking outside of the window. For many Black children, they're used to looking outside of the window, never looking at the mirror, because they're not seeing themselves often represented in the images that they're consuming. And so for us at Cassava Public Press, one of the major things I was really interested in is to produce books, children's books, where children see themselves represented in what they're consuming, rather than just constantly seeing Snow White in everything, so that they see themselves through the filter of whiteness. And at the same time, I want to take those books out into the world, so that the world can also look into these other worlds, right? To see how much we are so connected, rather than just thinking there's Africans here or Nigerians here, Black people here, white people here, Europeans here, that we always need to have a relationship between being able to look at ourselves in the mirror and look outside of the mirror. And this is how we're going to create a world that starts from the premise that we're all different. We don't start from a world of sameness, we start from difference, and we're trying to achieve sameness. So sameness is what we work towards. Difference is where we start from.
Right, wonderful. And Dilara, this is really also part of very much your reason why you started your publishing house.
Yes, exactly. I agree very much with Bibi and Alice. It's very important for children to see themselves in books, and for everybody to see each other in the books, because when we talk about difference is something that we have to re-examine and understand again, I think, because this is where we get interesting, and the beauties we can see. And so yeah, that was a part of why I really wanted to begin Tiny Owl, because I couldn't, well, my children, my son was 15, the older one was 15, but the other one was 9. And he was underrepresented in the books, and many of his classmates were also. And I think it was important for white children also to see the other cultural backgrounds and ethnic minorities, or they were not minority in that school. So really, they had to see everybody, and the society represented correctly. And especially with globalization and people traveling everywhere and seeing more of each other, this is becoming even more important, because we're not living in a small pond anymore. we have to see the world, and we have to let our children to see the world. And yes, so I really agree with Bibi and Alice completely.
Well, I have one question about translation, which is a very tricky issue, I think. Bringing books abroad to the US often means it needs to be translated. Julia, I know that you are a translator as well as a publisher. What has your experience been? Have you done any books that you've translated that have into English that have been published in the US? And what has your experience been?
Because we at Gecko Press are translating 85% of what we publish, and then selling those books around everywhere. In the beginning, we used to do a separate version for America, and quite quickly I realized that wasn't working. So now we do a double edit when we're editing. We edit first for I'm loath to say British English, but that's kind of the version that we use in New Zealand, that sort of spelling system. And then we go again with an American editor. It's not hard, I think. We just have to be looking through it's another part of the translation process, of looking through the lens of the people that are reading from wherever you are. I think that we used to say back in an old job that when you translate, when you first translate, it's like looking through a dirty window, and then with the editing process, then you remove that. You don't know the window's there, so that's what we're aiming for in the translation, that you don't feel that it is translated. Not sure if that's answering your question. There are lots of words that we can't use. There are we did publish a book called Tell Me, which is a book of questions about sexuality and puberty, with some quite frank cartoons from Germany. And that was a really interesting process for us, because often we find in America that sometimes it was very interesting, because in some respects America was more open to some of the concepts in the book, and in other places it was too much. It was not. And so the original book that came from Germany with the children, it's based on questions that children have asked. Some of the questions, it was just a really, we had to really rework the book so that it could fit with all those two things, the openness and the closeness, somehow at the same time.
Well, actually, Alice had sent me a comment, a concern that, which, if I get my video on, which is similar, about how much Americanization do you go through in order to bring the book to the US? And I guess one of my questions is, does it delude the character, for lack of a better word, of the origin of the book and its original?
Well, we would keep the original. We would make a decision if we've just recently translated a book from Taiwan, and so we've kept the name of the main character as Lei Long, which means little dinosaur, but rather than changing that name to Gus or
yes.
So I guess it's one of the many decisions that you make as you're producing.
Right. Dalaram, you your first books, you had brought them from Iran, and they were translated from the Farsi. Did you do the translation? How did your translation of those books work?
Very difficult. It wasn't me. I have a friend who's a professional translator, and she did the translations. But it was very difficult because, in my experience, it wasn't just the words that needed to be translated. It was a whole culture. And even the illustrations and the feelings and all of those things to make the audience feel the same way that the author wanted them to feel, or to understand the same thing, we had to think about everything and choose very carefully what we are saying, what we are writing. We edited those books many times to get it right. But I want to give you an example. So there was a book that we wanted to publish, and it was a kind of, it wasn't poems, but it was a bit poetic. And there was, the title of the book was Watermelons with Knife Condition. I mean, balloons with knife condition. And that means in Farsi, when you want to buy watermelons, they cut it for you to show you that it's red and it's ripe. And they say, this is a knife condition. So we are selling you conditional watermelons. And the book that we were going to publish was, the title was telling us that not everything could be described or tested with a knife. So if you want to test a balloon in that condition, you will lose it. But we couldn't translate this correctly. It was very difficult because you don't have those sayings. And well, when you want to put a knife in the title, it means something completely different. We lived in a very warm, hot country, and thinking about rain was something that people longed for and wanted to see, and they feel very positive about it. But in the UK, people hate it. So most of our children's books were very positive about rain. And when we wanted to translate that, we always have those questions when children ask us that, why is raining so positive in your book? It's something that we couldn't change, but it doesn't convey the meaning that the author wanted to in the first place. So it's very difficult. And even in illustrations, when you have different aesthetics and you want to show different art styles from different cultures, countries, it's difficult to sell those to parents, to teachers, to the gatekeepers, because children are easier, they understand everything. But those people who want to show the books to children are important. And well, these were all the difficulties that we had in translating the books. But I think it's all worth it. It's a whole other culture that we're introducing to children, and that's worth it.
Well, I think we could probably spend literally a weekend conference on all the nuances and the issues of translation, and also portraying the world, whether it's Africa or Iran, or Nigeria, I should say, in Iran, to an American audience, and how receptive America is to this. I would say more and more, as a reviewer myself, we are eagerly and actively looking for books that authentically portray another country and culture. Believe it or not, we have spent a lot of time. We've only got about 15 minutes. Let me ask you, The last couple questions I have, you are the founders of each of your publishing houses. That's pretty amazing. You're independent publishers. And I would like to know, what have your biggest challenges been in establishing your publishing houses? I know there've been lots.
Yes. I mean, if I can jump in here, I mean, I think, if I were to talk about the challenges of establishing a publishing house, that'd be quite different. I think that the immediate thing that jumps to mind when we talk about challenges is obviously this last year, which has been unlike any that anyone has, ever had to deal with. And I think that has been such an interesting one for us, trying to not just, manage and survive and weather the storm as a publishing house, but how to keep our readers reading. And I think for us, it very much became not just about how do we get books where they're meant to be, because obviously, supply chains are disrupted and, printers stop printing and all of that. But it was that idea of how then do we make our books into a format that is still accessible to children anywhere. So for us, it was a question of we converted our books to digital formats sort of immediately. We started doing book readings online, which we hadn't done previously. We tried to create resources and activities and various things. So I think it was all that idea that children are going to need to keep reading. They may not actually be reading the physical print books that we've been spending our last several years trying to make in their beautiful forms. And I think that's something that we will sort of take with us into the future, how to just be as accessible as we possibly can. And that goes for not just children in our own country, but children in America, but also elsewhere in the world. And the beauty of things like the digital is that you can reach very many people in sort of immediate ways through ebooks and such. So so I think that for me has been a big challenge, how to sort of navigate that, particularly as sort of at the top of the sort of managing a team and managing our processes and having to sort of pivot in various ways to get through that.
Anyone else would like to share some a challenge that they've had?
I think for me at Gecko Press, which is coming up 16 years old, I think the the challenge is one of it's the everyday little things that are the challenge, and I think there are in the markets that we are working in, there are so many books, and so the challenge is how to have the books rise above and be visible, and reach the readers, the children, past those gatekeepers, and especially when we're choosing non-mainstream books. I think on the scale of sort of commercial versus whatever the other scale is, I think that is the challenge, to make the books visible against the in this sea of wonderful books. But on the other side of that, it means that you just get to choose the books that you choose because you want to publish them, and so that's the big plus.
Yeah, I think being an independent publisher is a challenge. So yeah, the big challenge is being an independent publisher. Yeah. We're facing it every day, and so the good side of it, as Julia said, is doing what you really want and choosing the best books that you would choose to publish, I think.
I have two quick questions. Let me just ask this. I call it the good neighbor question. In looking over your websites, I was absolutely impressed by your outreach efforts into the wider community. you are more, or you seem to be more than just individual publishing houses. You support all sorts of local literacy efforts. You mentor newcomers to publishing as well as writing. You even try to print books on sustainable paper. Can you comment briefly on your roles as good publishing neighbors? I think this comes with small independent publishers as well.
I mean, I think for us at least, I mean, we very much count ourselves as a social enterprise as well as a publishing house. So we have a sort of a mandate to do sort of social and or environmental good as much as we can while we're publishing, while we're being a commercial business. I mean, for us, I think the sort of the main things are the way that we operate a buy one, give one sort of sales scheme, I guess, from our website, so that for every book that's bought from us directly, we donate one to a charity partner, and they're literacy partners in different countries who are accessing some of the more vulnerable children that we can't otherwise reach or that couldn't otherwise afford our books. And I think I'm becoming increasingly aware of the environmental footprint of publishing, full stop. It's a very polluting industry just in general, and we're trying to put as many processes as we can in place to make it as sustainable as possible. I mean, you mentioned obviously printing on paper from sustainable renewable sources, but we now only print with non-chemical inks, so non-petroleum based inks, and we're moving towards 100% zero plastic packaging for our deliveries. I just think it is sort of an inclusive, thriving community. For me, doesn't seem to make sense unless it's on a thriving planet. So anything that we can do to try and marry up those two things is right for us, I think.
Yeah,
I think for us is because when I think about the African continent, there's the paucity of publishers. It's quite low. The publishing is still in its nascent form, and part of what we do is to try and support new publishers to come on board, because I think it's really important to have more, to build the ecosystem so that we can have a publishing infrastructure on the continent and we can have more books. We don't have enough books. So therefore, because we don't have enough books being published, especially for children, we are overwhelmed by books from other countries that are not necessarily reflecting the complex realities and diversity of the continent. So my mission is really to go around doing workshops with emerging publishers or those who are interested, and trying to encourage more people to publish.
Oh, wonderful. Well, our time is almost up. Let me ask a concluding kind of general question. Tell us something about a book you are proud of publishing, or perhaps some award or accomplishment your publishing house has been recognized for. You're smiling, so I know that you've had some very good things come your way with all your hard work.
Can I start then?
Yes.
Yes. So it's very difficult to talk about accomplishments and things like that, but the first thing that I can think of is that there is a book that we started publishing with it, both in the UK and the US. This is a book that I was read to when I was a child, and I read it to my children, and we published it here, and I'm very proud of it. It's The Little Black Fish, and I'm very proud of it. It's been in print since we started publishing till now. And one of the moments that I was really emotional about this book was in Hay Festival, when they had a little play of that book. And there was a full room of children watching that play. And when it's and when it ended, I looked at children's faces and I could see how they were thinking, and they were happy, and they related to the story. And I was really emotional. And I thought that I owed something to that author and that book. And now I had done my part, and I was so relieved as well. Yeah, so if I want to choose something to talk about, is The Little Black Fish.
Thank you.
I'll go and look
How
for it.
about Julia? How about you?
I think for me, a book, we published a book that translates as Duck, Death and the Tulip, by Wolf Albusch from Germany, and it is a book that has the I think in the Anglo-Saxon culture anyway, it's often the figure of death and the idea that you would have a children's book that even mentioned that had a skull, a death with his lovely, he's very kind, but it's a very open, non-judgmental, and it's a book it's one of the books that I think that the more times that I can't now read it the way that I read it the first time I read it, because I've changed with the reading of it hundreds of times. And I think the book I see difference in the book now to what I saw when I first saw the book. In the beginning, you get a bit shocked by the skull, but now I just see the kindness of the death figure, and the humor, and the sort of the open-ended lightness of it. But it did, when we published it, it wasn't much approved. It's what we call a Marmite book, that people either love it or they really
I love that book too, yeah.
So I'm proud to have that book on our list. Yeah,
you're a risk taker, Julia. Alice, and then a final word from BB. What about you? Are you particularly proud of a book or something you've accomplished?
I mean, when you have a small list, obviously you're proud of all of them to an extent, but I guess one book that I would mention, just because it's just a very recent book of ours, it's an unusual one for us because it's a book of non-fiction. We're usually a fiction publisher, but this particular book is called Escape, and it's based on these fantastic, well, I say fantastic, I mean traumatic in some ways, but incredible journeys that real people have taken over history and across geography to reach places of safety. So essentially refugee narratives or migration narratives. And I think we've the authors, the twins, authors Ming and Hua, two twins, identical twins, had focused on all these the positive ways in which these journeys ended in a space of happiness and safety, and how these migrants then contributed huge amounts to that new space that they ended up in. And so we had, for instance, the story of Hans and Margaret Ray, who I don't know if you know, the creators of the Curious George picture books, and they fled Nazi occupied Paris on homemade bicycles, carrying the first manuscript of Curious George in their backpack on these bicycles, and sort of various stories from around the world. But there was one story which was about a woman called Laura Alvarez. She did this terrifying night crossing from Mexico into the US in order to find a safe space there, and she was unknown to anyone apart from the authors, as in she's not a famous name, but when she saw the book for the first time, she just cried, and it was just that idea of sort of immortalizing her story and just making these sort of ordinary extraordinary people who've done these wonderful things, just making it into a narrative that can be told over and over again. And I think that's really a wonderful thing.
And tell us the name, Alice, very quickly, the name of the book.
Oh, it's called Escape. One day we had to run. Yeah.
And BB, I hear that you are a major force in African publishing. What are you most proud of?
I'm like Alice, it's very difficult to say, but there's one which is a book is a nonfiction called Birds of Our Land for children. It's a West African guide to young people, introducing young people to birds, because often in Nigeria, most of the bird watchers tend to come from abroad, and there's so many beautiful birds across West Africa, and we don't have a relationship through birds here. And so it was, for me, producing this book and then having the names of the birds in Yoruba, English, Hausa, and Igbo was just, so far it's just been one of those moments for me in my life to see birds and know the names in Yoruba at least, because that's another language my Nigerian language I speak. And then watching both parents and children getting really excited, just trying to discover the names of birds that they know the Yoruba or Igbo or Hausa name, but they don't know their names in English, and vice versa. It's just been incredible. And it continues to be a book that children love, parents love it, educators love it. And I'm really proud of that book. And so we've decided that we're going to publish it in the UK and in America for the American market next year.
And I think it will be really readily accepted, eagerly accepted.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank each of you. Very impressive for taking the time from your busy publishing lives to participate in this dialogue. Your passion, your commitment to bring quality children's books is very impressive. We're going to be posting each of your websites at the end of this video, and I am hoping that ALE attendees will visit them and become familiar with your material, your books, explore your offerings. And again, thank you so much for sharing your publishing visions with us at this USBBY program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.